Hi, my name is Robert. I made this video about FLI limits so that hopefully you can understand all the craziness that you're trying to memorize. I'm not an IP, I'm just a flight school student, but everything I've got here I pulled right out of the RFM. So take it with a grain of salt. Definitely look into it for yourself, but most of this should be pretty accurate. While I was in primary, I saw this chart, and I think it's one of the daily questions too, and you realize that you got to memorize all of these numbers. But until you know what they are, it's really difficult to just commit them to memory. My hope is that by putting them in some context, it can make it a little bit easier for you. So here's what I'm going to cover in this video. First off, what is an FLI? The three different modes that you see for the FLI, and then finally the actual limits that are associated with each of those three modes. So first off, what's an FLI? FLI stands for First Limit Indicator. Essentially, it's going to tell you what's going to kill you or the helicopter first. The FLI is really three gauges in one. At any given time, it's only showing you one piece of information. So whatever is the next thing that's going to go wrong is essentially what the FLI is going to show you. So it could show you N1, which is the gas generator speed. It can show you TOT, which is the turbine outlet temperature. That's how hot your engine is. And then finally torque, which is pretty self-explanatory. So some examples: when you're about to start the engine, one of the things you check is to make sure that the square is on TOT. That's because the most likely thing to go wrong during an engine start is to overtemp the engine. So to make sure you don't have a hot start, you want to make sure that the FLI is actually showing you the temperature of the engines. Another time you see it is later in the process, and it's telling you that the FLI is not in torque mode right now, then it will be soon. Not to worry, that it will switch over to torque once it's time. So first off, let's talk about TOT. TOT is that turbine outlet temperature. Exactly what it sounds like. It's telling you how hot the engine is. So the first thing you need to recognize is this range right here. That's your TOT starting range. That's where you want the engine temperatures while you're starting them. It's from 650 degrees Celsius to 700 degrees Celsius, or 6 to 7 FLI. It says in the RFM that FLI is not a representation of torque. It's not a representation of percentage. It's just an arbitrary number. Don't feel like 10 is 100%. It's just arbitrary. It gives you something easy to look at real quickly while you're flying. So your normal starting range here is 650 to 700, or 6 to 7 FLI. The next limit is your max TOT starting. That's 8.5 FLI, or 785 degrees Celsius. You really don't want to go above that temperature. And then you have your TOT starting transient. With the Lakota, you have something called a transient, where you can exceed the normal limit for a very short period of time. So the transient for TOT is 865 degrees Celsius, or 11 FLI. And you can be in this range for 5 seconds. That's not a lot of time. So, for instance, if you spend 4 seconds at 800 degrees Celsius, that's okay. If you spend 1 second at 866 degrees Celsius, you overtemp the engine. If you spend 6 seconds at 786, you overtemp the engine. You want to avoid being in this range if at all possible, and try to stick to that normal starting range. So back to our chart from the beginning. These are the things that we just learned, right? We learned these three values with 4 different numbers associated with them, and we have a time limit associated with that transient phase. Next we have AEO. AEO stands for all engines on, and this is what you're going to be dealing with most of the time. So right here we have your takeoff power range. You're allowed to use this much power during the takeoff phase. It's 71 to 88% torque, or 8.5 FLI to 10 FLI, and you have a time limit of 5 minutes in that range. You can use this power, but only for 5 minutes at a time while you're taking off. And then for some reason they have this as a separate limit. but the AEO max takeoff power is just the top end of that takeoff power range. So same values, it's 88% torque, which is 10 FLI. And then with AEO, you also have this. That's your max transient. So there's that transient again. We can go above 10 FLI, but only for a very short period of time. That's going to be 97% torque or 10.5 FLI for 12 seconds. Also of note here is your 71% torque, 8.5 FLI. That's the beginning of your takeoff power range. You can't go past that once you're at 65 knots or higher. So you really do most of the time want to stay below that 8.5 FLI. So back to our chart. These are the values that we just got, right? These are all our AEO limits that we get when we're in AEO mode. When the FLI is showing you all engines on torque mode, these are the limits that you're going to see. And then here it is filled in with the TOT limits that we learned already as well. All right, going into the last mode of the FLI, it's OEI, or one engine inoperative. The first limit you see here is your max continuous power. It's kind of analogous to that 71% value that we saw with all engines on. Here with one engine inoperative or single engine operation, it's 91.5% torque or 11 FLI. And again, no time limit to that because that's your continuous power. The next one we see here is OEI 2.5 minute power. It's 125% torque or 12 FLI. And yes, there's a time limit of 2.5 minutes, just like it sounds. And then finally, right down here, we've got our OEI max transient. It's 140% torque or 14 FLI. And there is a time limit with that as well. It's 12 seconds, just like the other transients. It's a limit. You can exceed that 125% torque for a very short period of time, up to 140% torque, and you can only do it for 12 seconds. And I'm pretty sure the RFM says that both of these transients should only be accidental. You shouldn't be going into that range deliberately. Also, there's a specific OEI FLI limit for training. Get with your IP and find out what that limit is. I'm not sure what it is right now, and I don't want to get in trouble and give you the wrong information. So back to that chart from the beginning. We've learned these values now. So these are our OEI values. These are the limits that we see when we're in OEI mode. And then with the rest of the limits that we've learned, now we've completely filled out this chart. And so you probably don't already have all of these memorized, but at least now you know what you're supposed to be memorizing and what these values are. So just to review, these are the key takeaways. The FLI is 3 gauges in one. It could be showing you TOT, OEI, or AEO. At any given time, the FLI is only showing you what's most likely to go wrong. And it's really helpful to try to memorize these limits separately. So memorize your TOT limits, then memorize your all engines on limits, and then your one engine inoperative limits. So good luck with flight school. Hope you do really well, and remember to keep the spenny part on top.